Carl Jung warned about a terrifying truth in human connection. Sometimes the bond you call love is actually a prison. These attachments don't heal you. They hollow you out, one compromise at a time, until you mistake suffering for devotion. And the worst part? You may already be caught in one. Imagine a woman named Anna. From the outside, her relationship looks ordinary, even enviable. Her friends see the smiling photos, the carefully chosen words of affection, the illusion of stability. But behind closed doors, Anna feels a weight she cannot describe. Every disagreement leaves her apologizing for things she didn't do. Every moment of silence feels like punishment. And yet, when she thinks about leaving, her chest tightens with fear, stronger than any physical lock. She whispers to herself late at night, "Why can't I walk away?" Jung would say that Anna is not weak. She is bound by something far older than the relationship itself. What modern psychology calls trauma bonds, Jung understood as unconscious attachments formed from the earliest wounds of childhood. These bonds are not chosen with logic. They're carved into the psyche like scars. When a child grows up in an environment where love is mixed with fear, neglect, or conditional approval, the nervous system learns a dangerous lesson. Connection is survival, even if it hurts. Years later, that child becomes an adult who unconsciously seeks out what feels familiar, mistaking it for love. The toxic partner does not appear as a threat. They appear as the missing piece. And so, Anna's chain is invisible, woven from the repetition of unhealed patterns. Jung wrote about shadow projection, the way we unconsciously place our hidden wounds onto others, drawing to ourselves the very people who will mirror them back. Anna's shadow contains a fear of abandonment, a belief that she must sacrifice herself to be worthy of affection. The partner senses this vulnerability, perhaps without even realizing it, and the dynamic begins. Moments of kindness reinforce the bond, while moments of cruelty deepen the dependency. Anna tells herself the pain is proof of love, that her endurance is strength. But Jung would interrupt her here with a chilling reminder. This is not strength. This is design. The psyche repeats what is unresolved until it becomes conscious. Every time Anna stays after being hurt, every time she silences her needs, the chain tightens, and the unconscious cycle continues. This is why so many intelligent, capable people remain in toxic relationships. It is not about knowledge. It is about ancient programming, written in the nervous system long before rational thought had a chance to intervene. And when you try to break free, the fear that rises is not the fear of losing the partner. It is the fear of reliving the original abandonment from childhood. The terror is disproportionate because the wound is deeper than the present. That is why Anna feels paralyzed. It is not weakness. It is the unconscious holding her hostage until she can bring it into awareness. Jung believed that only by naming these patterns can we begin to loosen their grip. When you see that the chains are not made of love, but of shadow, the first crack appears. The question is whether you are willing to face the fear of emptiness long enough to walk through it. But awareness alone is not enough. Jung warned that the unconscious does not release its grip easily. The partner may sense the shift, escalating fear, guilt, or promises of change to keep the bond alive. The psyche itself resists freedom because pain feels safer than the unknown. Yet the invisible chains begin to weaken the moment you stop calling them love and start recognizing them as survival patterns. liberation is not instant. It begins with one terrifying step: seeing clearly. And once seen, the chains can never be completely hidden again. Behind every toxic attachment is an older story, written long before the first kiss, the first argument, or the first betrayal. Jung believed that the patterns we repeat in adult relationships are often echoes of our earliest bonds, the invisible script handed to us in childhood. Imagine a boy named Daniel. He grew up in a household where love was uncertain. His mother adored him when he behaved, but turned cold when he expressed his own needs. His father was present in body, but absent in affection, offering praise only when Daniel performed perfectly. The lesson carved into his young heart was simple, but devastating. Love must be earned, and affection can vanish without warning. Years later, Daniel meets partners who seem magnetic. He feels pulled to them, not because they are truly compatible, but because they carry the emotional fingerprints of his childhood. The girlfriend who withholds attention until he apologizes reminds him of his mother's silent treatment. The partner who withdraws approval when he falters echoes his father's conditional praise. To Daniel, this does not feel wrong. It feels familiar. And the psyche, Jung taught, is magnetized to the familiar, even if the familiar is wounding. This is why people so often say, "I always attract the same type." It is not attraction. It is repetition. The child within us is still searching for resolution, still hoping to rewrite the past by choosing a partner who mirrors it. The unconscious whispers, "This time it will be different. This time they will finally love me the way I needed to be loved." But the trap is cruel. The past cannot be rewritten through another person. And so Daniel finds himself reenacting the same wounds again and again, locked in cycles of pursuit, disappointment, and compromise. Jung called this process shadow projection, the disowned pain of childhood cast onto those we love. The shadow contains everything we rejected about ourselves to survive: the fear of abandonment, the shame of imperfection, the hunger for unconditional care. When a partner triggers these shadows, the intensity feels like destiny. But it is simply the unconscious demanding recognition. And here lies the tragic irony. The very instincts meant to protect the child become prisons for the adult. Daniel does not choose freely. He is chosen by his wounds. Every compromise, every apology for simply existing, every desperate attempt to be enough is not about the present partner at all. It is about the ghosts of childhood repeating their lines through a new actor. Jung warned that until these early imprints are made conscious, they dictate our choices in love, in friendship, and even in the roles we take in society. The blueprint is invisible, but it is powerful enough to keep entire lives trapped in unconscious repetition. You are not failing when you fall into these patterns. You are reenacting a script that was handed to you before you had the power to question it. And the first step toward freedom is daring to admit the truth. You are not choosing. You are repeating. Not every toxic attachment begins with cruelty. Some of the most dangerous begin with tenderness. Jung observed that those who unconsciously drain others rarely appear as villains. They often arrive as healers, victims, or companions who seem to understand us completely. They enter our lives carrying the perfect mask, the mask of need. Imagine someone named Claire, who meets David at a vulnerable moment. He listens to her fears with unusual patience. He shares his own struggles, his loneliness, is pain. To Claire, it feels like destiny. At last, someone who understands her depth. At last, someone who makes her feel necessary. But slowly, the pattern emerges. David's problems never end. Each week brings a new crisis that only Claire can fix. Her compassion becomes currency. Her time becomes obligation. Her energy becomes fuel. And still, she tells herself, this is love. Jung would warn her that she is not in love. She is being fed upon. Yet it is not the kind of feeding we imagine in horror stories. It is invisible. It happens through emotional extraction, through endless conversations where one person pours out pain and the other absorbs it, through guilt disguised as intimacy, through the subtle training of the empath to believe their worth lies only in saving another. Jung described this as the shadow's hunger, the unconscious attempt of one person to steal the light they have lost within themselves. The partner who drains is not always malicious. They are often deeply wounded, cut off from their own vitality, and so they learn to survive by tapping into the vitality of others. To Claire, David looks like a sensitive man in need of care, but beneath that surface is a pattern, a dependency that feeds on her energy, not her love. The cycle deepens because of the illusion of reciprocity. Every so often, David will offer a flood of affection, a grand gesture, or a rare moment of appreciation. These moments serve as hooks, reinforcing Claire's belief that her sacrifices are worthwhile. She thinks he just needs more time, more patience, more love. But the truth is far more chilling. He does not want healing. He wants supply. Jung emphasized that this dynamic is not weakness on Claire's part. It is design. When someone has been taught since childhood that love means service, they become the perfect match for those who unconsciously demand endless devotion. It is not that Claire chose David freely. It is that her shadow recognized his shadow, and the bond formed before she had a chance to question it. The predator in disguise is not always aware of what they are doing. They are not evil masterminds plotting destruction. They are people consumed by their own emptiness, projecting their hunger onto others, and convincing those others that giving until they are empty is the highest form of love. But the result is the same. The empath becomes exhausted, hollow, and confused, wondering why the connection that once felt like salvation now feels like suffocation. If you have ever found yourself drained after spending time with someone who never seems to improve no matter how much you give, write this in the comments. I protect my energy. Jung's insight was clear. True intimacy nourishes both people. If one person always leaves heavier and the other always leaves lighter, you are not in love. You are in an unconscious feeding ground. The mask may look like tenderness, but beneath it is survival at your expense. Why do so many people remain in bonds that slowly erode their spirit? Why does someone as intelligent, compassionate, and self-aware as you feel powerless to leave a relationship that clearly brings more pain than peace? Jung believed the answer lies not in weakness, but in what he called the unconscious contract, the hidden bargain struck between your shadow and your partner's. This bargain is not made with words. It is made with wounds. Imagine Michael, who grew up terrified of being abandoned. As a child, he learned that being quiet, agreeable, and endlessly forgiving kept his parents close. Now, as an adult, Michael finds himself in relationships where he is taken for granted, overlooked, even mistreated. And still, he stays. Why? Because deep inside, his shadow has promised something. If I never upset them, they will never leave me. the bargain is cruel, but it feels safer than the risk of emptiness. Jung wrote that the psyche would rather repeat familiar suffering than step into unfamiliar freedom. In other words, you cling to the pain you know, rather than face the abyss of being alone. This is why people say, better the devil you know. But Jung warned that this thinking is the shadow's trap. The shadow convinces you that suffering equals loyalty, that depletion equals devotion, that compromise equals love. And so you begin to interpret your very pain as proof of connection. This is not love. This is a shadow bargain, an exchange of your vitality for the illusion of safety. You may believe you are choosing your partner, but in truth, you are choosing your wound. Every time Michael forgives betrayal without change, every time he silences his own needs to preserve the relationship, he is not serving love. He is serving the shadow contract he signed long ago in childhood. And like all contracts forged in the unconscious, it demands sacrifice without end. Jung would stop here and say, this is not weakness, it is design. The shadow is cunning. It whispers that staying makes you noble, that enduring pain proves you are strong, that being endlessly forgiving is evidence of love. But the truth is more terrifying. These are not signs of love. They're signs of captivity. And yet, here lies the paradox. The moment you recognize the bargain for what it is, the spell begins to break. You realize the contract was never real. It was only a pattern, a survival script your psyche replayed without your consent. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. The chains may not vanish overnight, but awareness has already begun to weaken them. Every toxic bond begins with small compromises. A missed call excused, a harsh word forgiven, a disappointment rationalized. But over time, the pattern does not fade. It deepens. Jung warned that what begins as a minor imbalance often evolves into a cycle of betrayal, reconciliation, and renewed hope. The more the cycle repeats, the harder it becomes to escape, because each turn of the spiral tightens the chain. Imagine Sarah, who finally gathers the courage to leave a partner who constantly undermines her. She packs her things. She says goodbye. She tells herself it is over. For a brief moment, she feels free. But then comes the flood of messages, apologies, declarations of love, promises that it will never happen again. Her fear of being alone collides with the intoxicating hope that maybe, this time, change is possible. Against her better judgment, she returns. And for a while, things improve. There are flowers, kind words, even laughter. She tells herself she made the right decision. But soon the old patterns return. Slightly sharper this time, slightly heavier. Jung would call this the compulsion to repeat. The psyche, he explained, is drawn back to unfinished wounds, replaying them again and again, as though repetition might finally deliver resolution. But resolution never comes, because the script was never written for healing. It was written for reenactment. This is why so many people describe the cycle of a toxic relationship as addictive. The highs are euphoric, precisely because the lows are so devastating. The relief of reconciliation feels like proof of love, when in truth, it is only the temporary easing of withdrawal. The partner who returns with promises is not offering transformation. They are offering just enough hope to reset the spiral. Sarah tells herself the brief peace means progress. But Jung would say the spiral has simply tightened. The shadow demands another round. This is the hidden cruelty of toxic attachments. Each cycle steals a little more of your strength, making the thought of leaving seem more impossible. And yet, every time you return, the spiral accelerates, moving faster toward collapse. Jung wrote that the unconscious does not tire of repeating itself until it is made conscious. Until Sarah recognizes that the reconciliation is not proof of change, but evidence of repetition, she will remain trapped. The spiral will escalate until she either breaks the pattern or the pattern breaks her spirit. And here is the most chilling part. The escalation feels like choice. Sarah believes she is choosing to give one more chance. In reality, she is being pulled by forces older than the relationship itself, forces buried in the shadow that crave repetition over resolution. If this story feels familiar, know this: you are not weak for being caught in the spiral. You are human. But the moment you name the pattern, the spiral slows. Recognition is the first step towards stepping out of the cycle and refusing to play your role in a script that was never meant to set you free. The spiral cannot be broken by promises. It cannot be broken by waiting for the other person to change. It can only be broken by something far more difficult: facing the shadow that created the bond in the first place. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong work of becoming whole by reclaiming the parts of ourselves we once disowned. Imagine Michael again, the man who believed that if he never upset anyone, he would never be abandoned. His shadow carried the terror of rejection, the belief that love was conditional, and the fear of being unwanted. Each toxic partner he chose mirrored that wound back to him, not to destroy him, but to reveal what still lived in the dark. Jung taught that the unconscious repeats its lessons until they are learned. The spell of toxic attachment is broken not when the partner changes, but when the wound is brought into the light. For Michael, this means asking a question he has avoided all his life: what belongs to me, and what belongs to them? The answer is disorienting at first. His partner's coldness does not mean he is unworthy. His own fear of abandonment does not mean he must accept mistreatment. The exhaustion he feels is not the cost of love. It is evidence that his shadow has been steering the relationship. Jung warned that this recognition feels like death, because the identity we built on survival begins to crumble. Michael no longer knows who he is without the role of the endlessly forgiving partner. Yet this is exactly where freedom begins. Individuation requires solitude, reflection, and the courage to sit in the silence we once ran from. Journaling, meditation, or simply observing our emotions without judgment are the tools Jung described as gateways to awareness. They help us separate what belongs to our shadow from what belongs to others. The spell weakens when we stop confusing survival with love. The moment Michael writes in his journal, "I am not responsible for carrying someone else's emptiness," the chain cracks. The moment he sits in solitude and realizes he can breathe without begging for affection, the bond loosens. And the moment he whispers to himself, "My light is mine to keep," the spell begins to shatter. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That means accepting not only our kindness, but also our fear, our anger, and our hunger for love. When we bring these truths into the open, we stop projecting them onto partners who cannot carry them. Breaking the spell is not instant freedom. It is a slow awakening. But every small act of recognition is a step towards sovereignty. The love you seek outside is the love your shadow has been demanding from within. When you begin to give it to yourself, you are no longer trapped by those who only reflect your wounds. Freedom from toxic attachments does not arrive as a sudden burst of courage. It unfolds step by step, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. Jung understood that individuation, the path toward wholeness, requires not only awareness, but the willingness to act on it. Awareness cracks the chain. Action breaks it. Consider Sarah again, caught in the escalation spiral. When she finally recognizes the pattern, she does not leave in a blaze of triumph. She begins quietly, almost invisibly, by reclaiming small pieces of herself. She stops answering every late-night call. She begins journaling instead of apologizing. She allows herself moments of silence without rushing to fill them with someone else's chaos. Each small choice feels terrifying because her nervous system equates boundaries with abandonment. But with each act of self-preservation, the bond weakens. Jung would remind her that liberation requires courage to be disliked. Toxic attachments thrive on your fear of rejection. The moment you are willing to risk being seen as cold or selfish is the moment you step outside the script. The predator in disguise will sense the shift. They may escalate, guilt, or accuse you of changing. But that reaction is proof that the chains are breaking. Jung called this the resistance of the shadow, the way unconscious patterns fight for survival when they are threatened with exposure. The key is to hold steady. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. And clarity is what starves the shadow of its power. The path of liberation is not only about leaving what drains you, it is about finding what nourishes you. Jung taught that individuation means embracing your authentic self rather than performing for approval. For Sarah, this means rediscovering what brings her peace, walking in nature, reading, reconnecting with friends who value her without conditions. She begins to notice the difference between relationships that drain and relationships that inspire. Her body tells the truth. With some people, she feels lighter, calmer, more alive. With others, she leaves heavy and confused. Learning to trust these signals is part of what Jung called the wisdom of the unconscious. True freedom is not the absence of relationships. It is the presence of relationships that mirror your wholeness instead of your wounds. Jung warned that this path will cost you. You may lose connections built on your depletion. You may feel loneliness sharper than before. But the loneliness of authenticity is always less cruel than the crowding of captivity. And as you grow stronger, new relationships emerge, not with those who feed on your light, but with those who carry their own. Liberation is not simply leaving a toxic bond. It is becoming the kind of person who no longer attracts them. This is the path of sovereignty, living as someone whose worth is no longer negotiated through suffering, whose love is no longer tied to survival. The chains fall away, not because someone rescued you, but because you finally chose yourself. Jung left us with a warning more unsettling than any single relationship. Once you see the dark side of attachment, you cannot unsee it. The faces of partners, friends, even family begin to shift. And you realize how many bonds are built not on love, but on fear, repetition, and shadow. The chains you once called devotion reveal themselves as prisons. But Jung also offered a promise. Every time you refuse to dim your light, every time you set a boundary, every time you walk away from what depletes you, you step closer to becoming sovereign. And yet, freedom brings its own danger. Because when the bonds break, the silence that follows can be unbearable. Many people escape the trap of toxic relationships only to fall into a new one, not with another person, but with their own mind. They begin to overthink, to analyze every detail, to spiral into anxiety that feels endless. Jung hinted at this paradox, but it was Nietzsche who explored it with terrifying clarity. He believed that unchecked thought can become its own prison, a force as destructive as any toxic partner. So the question becomes, after you free yourself from the chains of others, how do you free yourself from the chains within? In my next video, Nietzsche, Why Overthinking Destroys You, we'll descend into that hidden struggle and uncover the cure